What's going on, guys, and welcome back, or I should welcome myself back. It's been about a week or so since we've actually uploaded anything. We took a slight break after streaming 2 days, the majority of the days, and then the last few days are actually put into this pretty largely anticipated video where we're going to talk about Cyber Dragons versus the current format, kind of my thoughts and what I go through when I'm playing against these decks, when I'm building my decks, all those great things. We're going to have a full-on hand trapping chart where you should hit decks and everything. Keeping in mind this video is catered towards when you're playing Cyber Dragons, so some of the things I say, some of the charts you may look at and say that's not quite true, but remember this is more specific to if you're playing Cyber Dragons, what I would do with my hand traps. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into our pros and cons of playing Cyber Dragons in the August 2021 format. So pros, it's pretty self-explanatory. This format is, I don't want to say slow, but it's kind of slow. Like, there's no super oppressive unbreakable board deck. Drytron is probably the closest thing to that, but they have so many points where we can like choke them down, and we have so much room for those techs. That's one of our pros, is 15 plus tech spots. Like, you can easily fit like 15 to 18 techs, whether that's hand traps, power cards, you know, kaiju, prosperity cards like these, and like it's just crazy how much room we have for this. If you want to play the Dragoon package, which I do really recommend, because there's so many hand traps in the format, and playing Dragoon, it gives us a good play after getting hand trapped twice. Like, there's so many times where I get hand trapped twice, or like Solemn Strike plus a hand trap, and I can still make Dragoon, and that can usually win the game. So I do really recommend the Dragoon package. The deck goes first or second. You're usually going to want to pick to go second, but if you lose the die roll, they make you go first, that's okay. If after game one you want to go first, that's okay. If you lose the die roll, you're not dependent on going first. The deck does go second really well, so that is a big pro. And with the whole Dragoon argument, variants of Cyber Dragon give it so much flexibility, whether you want to play the trap variant, really heavy on OTKs, which I don't recommend because all variants can OTK pretty easily, but I don't like focusing in on it, which we'll talk about here in just a second. But like a pure, more board breaking, control the pace type variant, like I said, the trap variant, probably the two best in my opinions. Contact Fusion is so big. Again, we're in a pretty link heavy format. You know, you got Adagnisters with their big boss link monster that a lot of the time will end up in the extra monster zone. You have Sky Striker back, you have Salamangreat back, we have Dragon Link where you can easily force out the seal, not to spoil that already. But also Cyber Dragons are one of the few decks that have searchable kaiju, which is just really strong. And like I said, they can OTK so easily. So these are just some of the pros of playing Cyber Dragons this format. What are the cons? Consistency. We lack starters. Everyone knows that. There's no easy way around it. If we were more consistent, we'd be a tier 1, tier 2 deck, probably tier 2 if we had the consistency. And the other thing I think that really holds Cyber Dragons back, honestly, it's the tunnel vision. There's a handful of players who are just really good players, and I always expect them to do well with Cyber Dragons, but there's so many, like, focusing in on the OTK is not a good way to play. All variants, like I said, can OTK really easily, so there's no reason to like focus your deck into it. Build your deck to have these going second cards, to have these hand traps, to stop decks from doing what they do, because our deck already can OTK with its regular engine. We don't need to be adding in the extra cards like limiter removal, like unnecessary fusion cards, like things like that. We just don't need it because the engine itself already can OTK. So that's kind of my thoughts on pros and cons. Now we're going to jump into our hand trap chart. Then we'll cover some going second cards. And finally, we'll break down each of, in my opinion, the top 8 decks most likely of the format. So we've kind of finished up a handful of the YCSs. We saw where we saw the Tri Brigade win the EU YCS, and then Prank Kids not only won the LCS, the DCS, they also won the North American YCS. So Prank Kids are a very scary deck. Here we can see now our first of a handful of hand trap chart. So we're going to cover Tri Brigade, Drytron, Prank Kids, Virtual Worlds. Again, more so if we're playing Cyber Dragon. And so let's say Tri Brigade. If you have Tri Brigade, what do you ash? Personally, I would probably hit the Fractile. You don't want them to load up the graveyard, so hitting that Fractile can really stop their plays and force them to have the starter in hand. And they really need another way to get like the engine going. I mean, if they normal kit or say Nerval link off into Almirage, then they can either dump the Nerval and then add the Karis, but then they need the discard from the Karis. So you're really forcing them to have these extenders to continue playing. Ghost Spell, Revolt, like that's pretty easy. Either you can force them to use the Revolt early to save the Appaloosa, or you get rid of the Appaloosa super easily, and when they try to revolt, you Ghost Spell. So Ghost Spell is pretty strong in that regard. DD Crow, I mean, sure, you can hit their targets to help, you know, keep stuff out of their graveyard so they can't do what they want, but remember they banish for cost, so you need to do it before that. And not only that, I'm just not big on DD Crow in the Tri Brigade matchup. Skullmeister, hitting Kit or Nerval, remember Fractile activates in hand. I'm going to try and go through these relatively quickly, by the way. Drytron, Alpha, Zeta, Herald. I mean, personally, I actually like hitting Zeta more than Alpha because I like keeping that fusion spell away. Obviously, they have other ways to access it, but that means they're not accessing their other power plays. And ashing the Herald not only stops the Arclight from hitting the grave, which is a searcher, it also stops the level modulation, which means Beatrice does not happen. So I am pretty big on hitting the Herald with the Ash. Keeping in mind by then though, they usually hit Benton and stuff, so depending how they opened, they might have already searched out the orange light, so that is a thing. Ghost Spell, you can hit the Alpha or Zeta if they're in the graveyard already. Otherwise, hitting the Medianus, because it can only add itself back from the graveyard once. Some only play one. And yeah, keeping that ritual spell away from them to keep the ultimateness off the field. Downside is you kind of have to choose. You'll see with the hand traps when versing Drytron, a lot of time either you're gonna be able to stop like the Beatrice play, which will stop like getting the double orange light or possibly even 3 orange light to hand, or you have to stop the ultimateness play, which it's kind of give or take. Either way, if you only have the one hand trap, they're probably going to get a couple disruption unless they kind of bricked on themselves. But you have to choose. Would you rather play through the disruption in the hand or on the field? Obviously, if you open, say, Dark Ruler or Droplet, you would rather play through disruption on the field because you know you can out it. DD Crowing the Benton, obviously strong. DD Crowing the Medianus, because once again, keeping that from getting back to their hand, keeping the ritual spell away from them. You know, when you hit a ritual deck, if you can take away the ritual spell, it's kind of good. Also, DD Crowing pretty much any of the Drytrons, like say Alpha, Zeta, they're in graveyard, and especially if they tribute another Drytron, and then you DD Crow them, they won't summon, they won't get the effect. You can just really hurt them in their resource game that way. Skullmeister, hitting any of the Drytrons, Benton, Medianus, you know, we kind of cover all the same cards to hit here. So it's pretty much Drytron, like trying to keep them from having that recursion on the Medianus here, so that's the big one. Prank Kids, Ash, you know, Ash and Meister, hitting that first kid, sometimes that's enough. A lot of the time now they are playing either Talent or Desires, playing like 3 Pandemonium, 3 Poly to really help open a way to play through that Ash or play around the Ash altogether. Also, if some people want to play Parallel Exceed, Pack was playing it in his YCS top, that's another way to get around the Ash or the Skullmeister, so do keep that in mind. Ghost Belling the Link 2s, either stopping the Doodle or stopping the Bow Wow, both are very strong. So DD Crow, well, you can hit one of the Link 2 targets to help prevent them from doing their plays, or you can try to hit the fusion spell if it got dumped to the grave and they're trying to get it back off of the Doodle, because you obviously don't want them to have the access to Pandemonium, which stops the access to Butler on your turn. Virtual World, stop Lulu. I heard if Lulu resolves, they win. If it doesn't, they're in an awkward position. So if Lulu resolves, they win, you're going to want to Ash the Lulu, right? Otherwise, you can hit the King Long, Bell, probably Lao Lao or Nyan, and then Meister and DD Crow, both kind of used on the King Long or the Chuchi. Obviously, the DD Crow, you would have to hit them preemptively, so they cannot banish to use for their effects. Meister, it doesn't really matter, let them banish it, and then you just negate it because it did activate in the graveyard. Dragonlink, Invoked, Dogmatica, Shadal, Sky Striker, and Adagnister, rounding out my top 8 decks of the format. Dragonlink, ashing the Chaos Space can hurt so much because now they only have 3 cards in hand. Otherwise, hitting the Quick Launch is probably the next best ash target now that Elpie is gone. Or say if you have Nibiru too, you just wait, let them extend, you Nibiru, then they try to use Seal, you ash the Seal. So if you have Nibiru, ash the Seal. Otherwise, Chaos Space, Quick Launch, Ghost Bell, hitting the Pisty, or even the Striker Dragon. Like if they use Striker Dragon's effect to pop itself to add back to hand, that's just really strong to be able to Ghost Bell it, because sometimes their play will be forced to do that, where then they can use the boot sector to summon out what they add back to their hand, and then they can like trace or pop the boot sector and can just continue playing in those ways. So Ghost Bell and Striker is actually low-key kind of good. DD Crow, the Chaos discard, because say they discard a light and search out Collapse Serpent, you get rid of that light. They don't play too many lights, so now that Collapse Serpent can really be hurt in their hand more often than not. I guess better example would be they use a Dark, and then you DD Crow the Dark. Now they can't use the Wyver Burster, so they would have to have, what, 3 others in hand. They'd have to use up their normal summon just to be able to continue playing. So it's not the greatest, but otherwise you can hit the Savage target to prevent Savage from getting any negates, or the Pisty target as well. I don't know how often they really use Pisty all the time. I feel like that's not really the best place to interrupt. Skullmeister, I'm not big on it in this matchup, honestly, but hitting Recharge or Tiding are the best things you can do. Otherwise, also, I suppose, you know, hitting that Seal when it tributes itself, and then they Seal to summon out a deck. You can Skullmeister the Seal. That's probably the best hit, actually. Should have put it on there. Anyone who comments it down below, I suggest rewatching the video and listening. Invoked, Dogmatic, Shadal, ashing the Alistair. I feel like every time I hit Meltdown, they have Alistair anyway. Some people say hit the Meltdown anyway, but I like to hit the Alistair just to, you know, I don't know. They usually only play 2 Invocation. They play 2 Invocation, 3 Alistair. Their odds of opening Meltdown Alistair are better than Alistair and Invocation. So mathematically, hitting the Alistair is the correct call. If they start out with, say, Nadir Servant, then you can just save it for the Ecclesia or the App Cologne to keep that window off the field. Ghost Bell, hitting Invocation, it forces them to use it from their hand, and keep in mind, you can even remind them if they have targets in their hand, they must fusion summon something. They can't just say, well, I can't banish my Alistair to make my Makaba now, so I'm just not going to do anything. If they have cards, they are forced to use it and make a suboptimal play. DD Crow, hitting Alistair after its effect resolves. You don't want to chain it to Invocation, because then they can just banish Invocation, get Alistair back, and now they have their follow-up play. Also a free Dark discard for App Cologne to go into their window, so you just want to do that prior to Invocation even being activated. Meister, hitting the App Cologne is the best thing you can do, but Invocation being the other. More often than not, though they will have the Makaba for the negate, so you kind of just force them to discard a card with Meister. It's not the best in the matchup. I guess if they open the Invoke play, that is. Sky Striker, you want to hit like the Hayate to keep them from starting their play. If they're going first, hitting the Shizuku. Obviously, there's Engage there too, but hitting the Hayate and Shizuku are probably the best hits. Ghost Bell, hitting Kagari, or I actually like Ghost Bell as a defensive card to stop Shark Cannon. DD Crow, the Kagari target, hitting the Ray. Usually Kagari's target because Ray, or like multi-roll targets, because Ray we can just Mega Fleet them, which doesn't trigger it, so it's not quite as bad. They don't have much that activates in the graveyard, so Skullmeister the Ray. Adagnister. I feel like this is one of our better matchups of the format, so I don't care if they go full combo, especially game 1, because they're usually going to have the link in the extra monster zone. Games 2 and 3, they might try to make it in the main zones, which makes it a little bit harder, but not too bad. But yeah, so ashing that Contact, 'cause that's just a draw 3. They'll probably hit like at least 1 more hand trap, and now they're almost guaranteed to have at least 2 to 3 hand traps. So ashing the Contact so they can't just draw 3 for free is the best card you can do. It's just a free +2. It's crazy. Ghost Bell, the AI Reborn. DD Crow Doyon's target, or just hitting the Danmari, because on your turn they're going to be able to negate one of your cards by banishing it from the graveyard. And likewise, Skullmeister negating the Danmari, because it banishes from graveyard, but it activates in the graveyard. Last group of hand traps, so Tri Brigade, Drytron, Prank Kids, and Virtual World again. Okay, sorry, second round. We have 3 rounds of hand traps. This time we have Veiler, Imperm, Mourner, and Gamma, the monster effect negations. Tri Brigade, you're going to want to hit that first banish for cost if you have Gamma, Imperm, or Veiler, especially if they normal summon it and they banish 2 for cost. Their graveyard's not loaded up. They already used a bunch of the effects, and they're just going to have a harder time playing through. Ghost Mourner, we can actually save this for our turn, and when they revolt and summon the Omen, you can chain the Mourner to negate the Omen. And also, I mean, if they have Solemn Strike, they have Solemn Strike, but otherwise, you negate the Omen now, and if it leaves the field, they take 3,000 damage. So if you make a Dragoon and pop it, it burns for 3,000 damage, and then they also take 3,000 damage from Mourner, so you can burn them for 6,000 damage very easily. Kind of a spicy little play there, but it is nice that it's a card that's live on your turn. You don't have to draw it in your opening 5. Drytron. Fafnir and Herald, like this, that's what you're going to see here. Mourner obviously cannot hit Herald because it cannot hit normal summon monsters, which is the downside to it, but hitting Fafnir is really strong. Like hitting Fafnir, you stop the Gamma dump more often than not, because that's what they'll go through, like unless they need like the Zeta or Alpha, if they didn't get to them yet. They'll dump whatever Drytron they need, and then also they get 2 free ritual summons just because. So negating the Fafnir stops pretty much all that. It pretty much means Ultimateness is not seeing the field, and then you just have to deal with the orange lights, which again isn't the worst thing in the world if you know you can play through them. Otherwise, if you know you can ult the Ultimateness, then you're probably going to want to stop the Herald instead of the Fafnir. So this really depends on your hand. Do you have the hand traps? Do you have the hand to play through orange light, 1 or 2 orange lights? Or do you have the hand to negate the Ultimateness and break their board? And that's going to determine, do you want to hit Fafnir or do you want to hit Herald? And that's pretty much all there is to the Drytron matchup. What's your hand like, and which route do you want to stop? Do you want to stop Herald or Fafnir? Prank Kids, yeah, stopping Doodle, because you can't use Effect Veiler on your turn, so they're going to be able to bow wow anyway. Hitting the Doodle stops the add, it stops the tribute to add back 2 from the graveyard. Keep that in mind too. So you can let them doodle and add if you would want. And then when they try to use Doodle's second effect, actually it tributes for cost, I believe, so don't let them do that. So yeah, ignore that part. But yeah, hitting Doodle. So you want to hit Doodle because, well, you know, it stops it, and like I was saying before, getting sidetracked. So it activates on the field, tributes, and you get your 2 cards back from your graveyard, and people say, oh, it's in graveyard now, it's not negated. That's not true. This is not skill drain. Imperm, Mourner, Veiler, once it's negated on the field, if an effect activates on the field, even if the card leaves the field, it still resolves on the field. So if it was negated, it will resolve negated. Cards like skill drain say while face up, it's no longer face up, that's why it will go through. Cards like Hieratic Seal are a good example to show something else where it has the one effect on field. Say you imperm it, and then they activate the effect tribute to bounce, it's going to resolve negated. There's a second effect that activates in the graveyard, but if it's all one effect on the field and it's negated by Imperm, Veiler, or Mourner, it will stay negated. Once again though, Mourner comes in here and you can actually force them to pretty much use their Butler immediately. Like if they try to put it on the field, you Mourner it, and now they have to use it right then or they're not going to be able to use it at all. So that's actually pretty strong. And then again, if it leaves the field, that's another 3k they're getting burned for. Gamma, you can hit the first kid with it or you can hit the Doodle. Hitting Doodle is pretty strong because, well, you know, you get it off the field, you stop the search. So, I mean, hitting Doodle's strong. If they can make another Doodle though, they'll still be able to recycle from grave. Virtual Worlds, we have not a whole lot because they activate mostly in the hand, which is why like Drytron Virtual World format, Imperm, Veiler, these types of cards were not very good. But now they do actually go through some plays. Your Mourner and Effect Veilers can actually hit Sulking to stop the Crystal Wing play. Imperm, you can wait till your turn and just hit like Crystal Wing, Kaliga, Shen, whatever you want. you can do it that way, or you can hit the Soul King to stop the Crystal Wing for sure. Gamma, you can hit the Lulu, you can Gamma the Soul King, which will stop the Crystal Wing and often stop the Kaliga play as well. So either Gamma on Lulu or the Soul King. Dragon Link, you know, with Mourner, Valor, and Imperm, I really like hitting Savage because they're a deck where if you hit anything else, depending on their hand trap or their extenders, because they have so many, they're usually going to do something. They're usually going to put up multiple disruptions still. Whereas if you use these cards on the Savage, you're guaranteed to stop one of their disruptions. Like, you're guaranteed. There's no way around it. You will always stop one if you use it on them. Otherwise, Gamma on the Striker, you stop the boot sector from hitting their hand, and that it's just gone. It's off the board. So now they need to be able to put 2 monsters on board with their 3-card hand, or with their 4-card hand, because they'll say normal summon, Link Striker, you Gamma it. Now they have the 4 cards that they have to be able to still put 2 monsters on board, and they don't have the boot sector. So I really do like Gamma on Striker Dragon. Invoked, pretty much hitting the Alistair. You can't hit it with Mourner, so hitting like Ecclesia or Winda on your turn, especially if you already got rid of that Makaba. So, you know, yeah, hitting the Winda, pretty strong. Sky Striker, Kagari, Shizuku, Kagari, Shizuku, Kagari, Shizuku. Like, you get the point here. Hitting Kagari and Shizuku. Otherwise, you can save them for access code because that's their win condition going second. Obviously, you can't respond to access codes, so Mourner and Gamma won't work in that regard, but you can Mourner or Gamma the Halka-Fibrex or the Celine that comes out before the access code. Otherwise, we have Ignister. Hitting like the Achichi or the Picari is also really strong. Kind of just trying to stop their plays. This is kind of a weird one though, because I almost would like them to combo off, especially game 1, and go through their combo, use up a lot of resources, and then like clear it with like a Mega Fleet and save my hand traps to stop their follow-up. But hitting like Achichi, Picari, like hitting their choke points in their Link plays, like the one that summons out, like, what is it, 3 from grave, the Link 3 I believe it is, you know, hitting that with Mourner. Mourner can obviously hit the other 2, you know, when they start special summoning as well. But yeah, the Achichi and Picari are really their 2 main searchers, so stopping them is the best hits you can do. Now the hand traps where they're not like card specific reactions, it's just, is it good or is it not good for a matchup? Well, Phantasme, Tri-Brigade, Drytron, Prank Kids, all Link. It's obviously going to be helpful there, help you dig, help you fix your hands, especially if you're playing Dragoon. Virtual World doesn't link, so it's kind of not good. Drone Lockbird hits Tri-Brigade, yes, because they'll say add off Nerval. Now the Desires, if they're playing it, or any pot spell they're playing, is dead, and also their Bear Boom won't be able to search out Revolt, so unless they hard opened it, they won't have access to it. So Drone Lockbird actually good against Tri-Brigade. Drytron, obviously we know Drill's really good against them. Prank Kids also, Drone Lockbird is kind of good because they do have Desires, they do have Pranks, they do have, some play Prosperity instead of the Desires. Otherwise they do have the Roxy's too, and they have the Place, giving it just a dash, because depending on their hand, they a lot of time only need 1 draw, and you're just stopping the Pranks draw at the end of in the end phase. But say if they open up with Place and you drill them, now you just turned off the Desires, you just turned off the Roxy's, which means they're not going to be able to go that like full combo route. They're still going to be able to do a lot, like, don't get me wrong there, but Drone Lockbird, it's really kind of hand dependent on them. It can be really good and it can be mediocre. Drone Lockbird versus Virtual World also hits them pretty decent. You know, they have King Long, they have like Lulu, they have Desires, they do draw and, you know, go through, and theirs are a bit more important, so being able to drill them is useful. Lancia versus Tri-Brigade obviously shuts them right down. Drytron doesn't really matter too much. Prank Kids I gave a dash because it does stop Roxy's and also the Desires. But if it was just Desires, it would have been the X, but since it does actually hit the Roxy's too, I did decide to give it a dash. Virtual World's obviously stopping Chuchi, stopping King Long, things like that, so it is very good. Nibiru, it depends depends. A lot of time they're not playing around Nibiru lately, it seems. They can make Appaloosa by summon 5, so it really depends on what they do and if they're playing Zoo, if they're playing Cat, or if they're playing Pure. If they're playing Zoo or Cat, which are the better variants, Nibiru does hit them pretty good. So this kind of just depends on which variant they're playing and how aggressive they are. So Nibiru can be really good, or it can, well, just run into an Appaloosa. Drytron, yeah, Nibiru hits them pretty well. They don't really put up a negate too soon. You can kind of wait till they're full on committed. They search out their one of ultimateness. They use the ritual spell to try and summon it, and then you chain the Nibiru, and often they'll have ultimateness and only like 1 or 2 cards in hand, and Nibiru makes them really pay. Prank Kids also can kind of play around Nibiru. They can play through it a little bit better now, but Nibiru definitely affects their end board. You know, you let them do everything, set their cards, go attempt to go into end phase, and then you Nibiru them as at the end of main phase. Now they set their quick plays, so they're probably not going to have a whole lot that they'll be able to do. So Nibiru does hit Prank Kids really, really good. Virtual World 2, like you can, more often than not, they're not putting up Crystal Wing by summon 5. I know sometimes they can, but from what I've seen and playing against them, more often than not, they don't get there by summon number 5. The other 4 decks, well, all 4 of these decks link summon on their play. So Phantasme, once again, really, really good. It's a cheap Prosperity for those of you who can't afford Prosperity. I do personally play Phantasme right now over Prosperity. I might go back to playing both, but for now I am on Phantasme. I think it's really, really strong. Drone Lockbird hits Dragon Link. It hits Invoked. Who would have thought? Sky Striker, it's kind of dependent on their hand. You might only stop like 1 search, but a lot of the time they just Shizuku in the end phase anyway. So Drone Lockbird kind of good against Strikers, kind of not, dependent on their hand. And Drone Lock very good against Ignister, but watch out, it is not a free auto win. I got OTK'd by Ignister after using Drone Lockbird. So while more often than not it is very good, it is not always a turn ender. Lancia, turning off Dragon Link's Chaos Engine is very strong, so that's obviously pretty good. It also stops Tiding when they try to dump it as an extender off like the Chaos Ruler. Invoked, it's okay. It stops like Invocation from using like the Alistair Engrave, so I mean it's good in that regard, but that's pretty much the only use of it, I suppose. Like Alistair, link into Artemis, Invocation, chain Lancia. Well, if they have Alistair in hand, they can still do it, but if they don't, now they're in a bad spot. So it's okay, but it's not always great, because that's pretty much the only use for it. Schism, it can stop them because they can't banish out of the grave, but at the same time they Schism on your turn more often than not, where Lancia cannot be used, so that's why it only gets a dash. Striker, Ignister, it doesn't really bother them too much, so I'm going to give it X's there. Nibiru, Dragon Link, yeah, it's pretty good. They'll get their Seal, which will trigger, and then they'll get like a Seyfert or a Brotar and search 11 year as a follow-up, but that's about it. Invoke, they put up Makaba first. Sky Striker doesn't summon enough, and add Ignister, yeah, it's pretty good there because you can hit them before they get to their final boss monster, and then it just helps a lot. Almost through with this. So the power cards going second, we have Dark Ruler, Forbidden Droplet, Lightning Storm, Super Poly. Yes, Super Poly is actually pretty good this format, and Triple Tactics Talent. So Tri Brigade, Dark Ruler coming in with just a dash. It can turn off the Ancient Warriors Link, and it can also turn off Appaloosa, but they still have the Revolt, hand traps, things like that. So it can help. It is helpful, and it's not bad by any means. It can stop, you know, the Appaloosa, and it stops the Ancient Warrior guy, like I had mentioned. Drytron turns off their field. It stops the Beatrice dump on your turn. It turns off Ultimateness, and you know, IP or Dragoon if they're playing either one of those. So obviously very strong in that regard. Prank Kids, yeah, it can be pretty good for Prank Kids. Obviously, if they chain like Butler to something, they're gonna banish the Meow Meow, but it stops one of the board wipes, so you're only gonna have to play through one board wipe as opposed to playing through 2. So it is actually kind of low-key good against Prank Kids. Yeah, that's my take. I guess probably could be a dash here though to whereas it's good, but it's not great. So maybe a dash should be more fitting for the Prank Kids matchup. Virtual World, turning off Dragoon or Kaliga, Crystal Wing, Shen Shen is really good. They'll still have Chuchi that you got to play through, so keep that in mind. Forbidden Droplet, it's good against everything. Like, you can quick play to negate Omen, you can quick play to negate Butler, you can negate a Drytron field, you can negate a Virtual World field. Droplet is just very, very good. Lightning Storm against Tri-Brigade, you get rid of their back row, which a lot of time is like Imperm, Solemn Strike. Forbidden Droplets, it's the Revolt. You first force Revolt to happen right away and not banish anything, so Lightning Storm really good versus Tri-Brigade. Drytron, not so much. They summon everything in defense anyway, so it doesn't really do a whole lot. And they don't rely on their back row. Prank Kids, you can force them to summon the Butler right away. You kind of just force their plays, so depending on your hand it can be really good, but depending on your hand it might not really help or matter in the end. Virtual World, you could get rid of the Chuchi, you stop that, and then or depending on, I've seen a lot of them summon an attack, but I'm not going to consider that. You hit the back row, you stop, like I said, the Chuchi, if they set any other type of disruption, because a lot of time they won't have a way to negate it. And yeah, so being able to destroy their back row, pretty good. You still have to play through like Crystal Wing, Shen Shen, or things like that, but it is going to be a little more favorable if you can get Lightning Storm resolved. Super Poly. So Super Poly versus Tri-Brigade, if they full combo, like you're not playing hand traps, they full combo, you Super Poly, you can hit the Ancient Warriors and the Appaloosa into a Mud Dragon, and then all you have to play through is like one disruption plus the Revolt, or if they open really good, maybe two. But then too, keep in mind, when they Revolt, the Omen will go in the extra monster zone, so you can easily contact fuse it away. Drytron hitting Starving Venom. This is more if they're playing the Dragoon variant. If they're not playing the Dragoon variant, it's not that good, because you can't Mud Dragon the Beatrice and the Ultimateness, because, well, they're both light fairies. Prank Kids, draw for turn, activate the Super Poly, and now they can't chain Bow Wow, they can't get their cards or their plays, you clear their board. So going Super Poly right away after drawing your card, because you have priority into a Rocket Ride of your own, is very, very strong. Virtual World, again, you can use like Shen Shen and Crystal Wing to go into a Mud Dragon, which obviously that's pretty good. So yeah, you clear out Shen Shen and Crystal Wing, and you get your Mud Dragon, which can also attack over Kaliga. So look at that, you didn't use any effects, you didn't activate them, you just completely broke their board off Super Poly. Triple Tactics Talent, Tri-Brigade, they're going to use either a hand trap or Omen, so then you can draw cards, steal cards, look at their hand, rip their cards, do whatever you need. Drytron, well, they're just going to continue negating it, so unless you have a way to stop their Ultimateness, it's kind of not that good. If you can stop Ultimateness, it is actually really good. Prank Kids, after they board wipe you once, you can steal the Butler and then board wipe them. Virtual World, yeah, they also use, monster effects, so they negate something with Crystal Wing, you can steal the Crystal Wing, attack like Kaliga or Shen Shen, whatever you'd rather attack, and just start playing your way. Like, say you attack Shen Shen, then set a monster, make a Mega Fleet, go into a Link 2 just to clear out their board. So Talent's pretty good against Virtual Worlds. The last one of these, I believe. So, Dragonlink invoked, Striker and Ignister with these same cards. Dragonlink builds a big board, so naturally Dark Ruler and Forbidden Droplet hit them pretty good. Droplet can hit the invoked dog, I think, harder. And I mean, Dark Ruler 2 is also decent against them, but they have so much back row disruption, which obviously Forbidden isn't going to do much against that, but Forbidden gets the check because going first or second, it is good. And keep in mind too, the majority of these are thinking on going second situations more than going first, because we are playing Cyber Dragon. Dark Ruler versus Striker and Ignister just not very good at all. Forbidden Droplet, again, you can use it on like follow-up for turn 2, you can use it going first, things like that. So it is okay, it is still semi-useful, but remember the big boss monster for Ignister is unaffected, so it doesn't do anything there. Lightning Storm versus Dragon Link, you can hit the tidying, clear that out. You can force the seal right away if you have a card in your grave. Otherwise you can get rid of the seal, which we already do that already, so it pretty much hits the tidying. You can hit the back row or force the Macabre for the invoked matchup. Sky Striker, obviously it's a blowout. Ignister, you can hit any back row they have, so again, pretty strong. Dragon Link, not only, they might say, well, they don't have 2 darks on board, and typically that's true, but once you summon a Cyber Dragon, they use the seal because they're going to lose it anyway, and they summon out more often than not Brotar to search out Levenir, and then you can hit them with Starving Venom. Using Macabre and Ecclesia, you can go into a Mud Dragon pretty easily, so Invoked Dogmatica is good in that regard. Super Poly, I should say, especially if they search out their Fleur de Lis, because, you know, they don't have a Dogmatica monster anymore. Sky Striker and Ignister, it's not that great. Ignister, there is the one fusion that uses 2 Cyberse monsters, but for extra deck space, I don't want to have to run 4, especially, I mean, that one would also hit Salamangreat, but I don't think either of those matchups really require Super Poly. Talents is useful in all these, like Striker and Ignister play so many hand traps, it really helps you draw 2 to continue playing. Dragon Link stealing their card, attacking, looking at their hand, ripping their follow-up. Same with Invoked, both really strong. So now let's kind of talk about each of these 8 matchups more individually. We'll talk about the matchup difficulty, game plan, and advantages Cyber Dragon have. So Tri-Brigade. I feel like this matchup's pretty neutral. It's not really favored in either direction. Game plan, I like a more mid-range approach. Like, I'm not super aggressive, I'm not super conservative. I kind of play in between. We easily out Appaloosa. We can force the Revolt early, which are 2 really big advantages we have. Like I said, I don't necessarily like go for the OTK. I don't try to win turn 1 versus them. I kind of take and give what I can. A lot of time, like if they have a couple back rows set, making like Appaloosa or forcing the Revolt and just trying to get 1 negate on board through their disruptions and then just taking a more mid-range approach against Tri-Brigade. Drytron. So I think this is one of the most of these are going to be slightly unfavorable. Unfavorable does not mean unwinnable by any means. All these matchups are very winnable, but Drytron is unfavorable, and I do have a more aggressive game plan versus them because I do want to try and put it away a little bit sooner. I want to try and win more right away. Luckily, this deck, once you break their board, if you can set up a negate, usually you won't be in a bad position. Advantages that we have, we break boards really well, and we have so much space for power cards, hand traps, and a searchable kaiju. You're going to hear a lot of this repeated because a lot of these are unfavorable, so, well, if they were all favorable, well, guess what? We wouldn't be tier 3 or rogue. Prank Kids, unfavorable again, and once again, a more aggressive game plan. This one I can't stress enough, like, I do not want to get in a grindy game of Prank Kids. I want to put this game away as fast as I can. Advantages, again, lots of space for the power cards and hand traps. We can search out a kaiju, and the fact that Cyber Dragons are not real linear, we can use like back row, we can use hand traps, we can use our monster engine, we can use spells. Like, we can kind of hit you from all different sides, where Prank Kids are really good at like board wiping or back row wiping and like continuing to outgrind you, but where Cyber Dragons aren't super linear, and we can put the game away quickly, so we can kind of try to come from a few different sides and then end the game turn 1 as often as possible. And that's kind of the approach I take with Prank Kids. If you do start to get into the grind game, keeping them from starting their plays is key. Dragon Link, again, unfavorable. You guys might disagree with some of these, but overall, these is just how it is. If these were all favorable, we'd be tier 1. We're not, so obviously the matchups are unfavorable, but winnable. Unlike the last 2, though, I'm not super aggressive against Dragon Link. You have to be leery because they do have a very good recovery game, and if you don't put up multiple disruptions, you better be ready for it. But just the fact that we can force the seal right away and we can take care of tidying rather easily, and then it's just playing through like the one negate that is the issue. So we can actually do decently well. Like, we have so much space for power cards, hand traps. Again, searchable kaiju, we force the seal. Like, you can really force their hand. Savage doesn't destroy it, just negates. So like, even if they use normal core and they savage it, they still have to use seal or tidying right away, because otherwise you can still make a mega fleet. And if they don't negate the core, now you get your search and you start to plus and snowball that way. So I do think that we have I'd say this one's less unfavorable than the others, but nonetheless it is unfavorable. But I don't think you need to have such an urgency. You can kind of play a little bit more resource game with Dragon Link, because if you open halfway decent, I feel like we can actually out-resource them rather easily. Virtual Worlds, another unfavorable matchup with a mid-range approach. This one I will put slightly behind Dragon Link. Their backup plan against us is a little bit better, and their board is also slightly harder for us to deal with. We have the kaiju, we have the hand traps, we have the power cards, but like when they put up like Crystal Wing, Kaliga, Shen just hurts so much because we can't contact fuse. So even if they put Kaliga in the extra monster zone, you have to get rid of the Shen before you can do it. You only get one monster effect, you can only attack once, you can only get negated by Crystal Wing, and then can't even use another monster effect. So the searchable kaiju is big here, because like kaiju like Shen, then you can set a card, make mega fleet, and now you just gotta play through the one negate and the Chuchi. So keep in mind Chuchi too. So one effect that they're gonna negate, one attack, banish on field, pop card. Like, I think it's definitely more unfavorable and probably one of our worst matchups of the format. I think Virtual World Prank Kids are probably our two worst matchups, and then Drytron with Dragon Link, and the next one being Invoke Shadal. I think Dragon Link and Invoke Shadal, while both unfavorable, are the better of the two matchups. And you're going to say, oh, we out Makaba so easily. Yes, we do, but they play so much back row. They have Schism, they have Punishment, they have, their Solemn Strikes if they're playing them, more room for hand traps. Like, it's not just Makaba pass. They have a lot of other plays, and I do think the matchup is slightly unfavorable, but just barely. Like, this is teetering on a neutral matchup, but I do think it is slightly unfavorable. However, being able to fortress the Makaba, having the kaiju, having the hand traps, the power cards, we really can play conservatively against them and just like outgrind them and out-resource them. Obviously they're gonna keep coming back, and their follow-up play they'll probably go for the other invoked one, the Augadius, or however it's pronounced, where they start popping your field and forcing you to do more and trying to pick up the pace of the game. But if you can keep a slower game plan versus them and kind of control the pace of the game, it's not unwinnable by any means. Sky Striker. So this matchup is obviously favorable. It is not free. I've seen that way too many times. If Sky Striker is free, you're not playing good Sky Striker players. Game 1, maybe it's free. After that, it is definitely not. And even game 1 isn't always. So game plan though, conservative. We can out-resource them. We can really control the matchup because Contact Fusion doesn't trigger Ray and Grave, which is huge, making Dragoons so easily after getting disrupted a couple of times. If they Widow Anchor, even if they take it, you can still make a mega fleet. Searchable Kaiju turning off their back row. Like, we have a lot of good things going for us against Sky Striker, so very favorable matchup, but not free versus a good player. And the final one, Adignisters. Again, favorable, not as favorable as Sky Striker, but again, you can kind of play conservative, clearing out with Mega Fleet and then having your hand traps, your power cards, your kaiju, and really just trying to out-resource them. The hard thing with them is they have so many hand traps that you can't just get greedy. Like, I'll make a Mega Fleet and then like start doing a couple plays to force some hand traps, but unless they drop 2 hand traps on you, 2 or 3, you really can't get rid of the Mega Fleet and commit to a bigger play, because they're probably going to stop that as well, because they just have so much hand trap room and disruption that way. So I like to play a little more conservative and not get too aggressive and take like 1 to 2 negates per turn and just out resource them flat out. So this is my take on Cyber Dragons, this format. Let me know down below what you guys think, how you felt the video was, how you liked me breaking it apart this way, anything you disagree with, or matchups we didn't talk about that you would like to know about. Thank you guys for watching. I know it took a little bit longer. Hopefully you use the timestamps to jump around, and take care until next time.